Is this a video selfie?
Yes, sir.
Garnette, we're going to walk along the southwest corridor. We're going to take a left onto one of the south end streets. We'll see one of the little kind of English imitation of London style parks. We're going to keep going. We're going to end up in actually a social housing development via Victoria. Did we walk through that
I
before?
love that development. Remind me of Tent City and its history.
Tent City, exactly. So I was explaining the origin of it in the actual tent city that happened here on the site in the late 1960s. The agreement to eventually construct social housing on the site, the agreement to construct the orange line underneath, to construct this park on top. We're seeing these great victories against the system. As you know, the 1960s was an anti-system time. Problem was they forgot about gentrification. So they did indeed create a certain number of social housing units. They did indeed create this pleasant amenity. By doing so, they spurred the rebirth of the South End, and of course the South End has become some of the highest priced real estate in the city. Kevin Lynch said the most appealing quality of a city was when you could have, at one door you had the activity and vibrancy of the city, and at the back you had peace and quiet. And I think that the prosperous, lucky people who live in the South End get that, because you can live on a street like this, which exudes tranquility.
Yes.
And you can walk 5 minutes in Copley Square.
Yeah.
So, thus the South End became extremely desirable. So we're on one of the main radial roads of the South End, Columbus Avenue. We'll get to Tremont Street, which is kind of the next one. And these streets to me they're not as successful as they might be. What do you think, Garnette? Why do you think the street's not very successful?
There is a lack of, the times I've been through, it lacks an energy, it lacks a vibrancy, it lacks the kind of encounters you think that gives a neighborhood a kind of glue and sensibility that makes you feel at once at home in the neighborhood, but also connected to the larger city. One of the indexes I use for neighborhood, does it have the whiff of trespass? Do I feel like I'm trespassing when I'm there?
Trespassing here?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the great irony is that what made it attractive in the first place was scale, and scale seems to be part of what makes it off-putting now.
Yeah, it's become a kind of a handicap, I think. And I think also the fact that the whole place is a historic district has made it hasn't operated in its favor in that sense, because actually what you need to do is convert a lot of these into shops. This is a natural location for cafes and active uses, and it doesn't manage to have it.
But you find what actually happens also, the way in which a neighborhood imposes a kind of behavior in those who move through it, that the South End suggests privacy.
Yes.
Perhaps even isolation. And so it feels taboo to pass someone and say, "Hi, how are you doing?" You're interrupting not only their space or peace of mind, but you're also interrupting the sensibility of the neighborhood. Whereas the neighborhood here seems to suggest, if you make eye contact, you say hi.
It's more urban.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I like this space a lot, in part because it has a somewhat bleaker, modernist quality to it, it's more abstract. I think these were the first buildings constructed, and they became more domestic afterward. But they also add a completely different scale element to Via Victoria. And I think these are necessary pieces of the project, because this building is a visual centerpiece. It's a kind of anchor marking it.
Yes.
This idea of the tower, the plaza, the low-rise building, these were all components of modernist urbanism. But most of the project actually is this humane, smaller landscape with the diversity of open spaces.
When you think of Boston and what you love about cities and what makes a city, what draws you here more than anything else?
It's a space that sees human activity and open space being totally complementary, without the overlay of pastoralism that so often you find in Boston. So every space in Boston is green because Boston is derived from the English tradition of space. This is derived from the Latin tradition of space, which sees space as human, paved, active, supposed to be a focus of activity, and why not put important buildings around it and have them feed onto the space? Copley Square actually achieves that to some extent. It's why it's one of the better Boston open spaces, I think.
at the public library in front it says free for all. And this
Free
suggests
for
that
all.
free for all. It suggests
This
that
space is
the bar of
absolutely-
entry
this
is
space
low,
is
that
absolutely free for
it's an
all.
invitation for encounter, it's an invitation for escape, it's an invitation for a kind of arrival in the city.
Absolutely.
Because when I think of cities, I think of a place in which you arrive. I love it.
It's a nice space.
Yes, very
Garnette,
much.
It's nice to see
Yes,
you.
and let's go walking again soon.
Absolutely.
This space and many more.